But Tom, why don't you give just a real quick introduction to yourself and your background before we get into the conversation tonight?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, first of all, appreciate everyone dialing in. I think we'll have a good discussion and questions tonight. Originally, I had intended to, give a longer presentation, more philosophically talking about business in general and some of the triumphs and struggles we've had here at Firefly. And I understand there are probably a lot of entrepreneurs online, and there may have been some connections that you could have made to your own experiences. But I can't drone on for an hour in an environment with staring at a camera. Definitely like to have a more interactive conversation with all of you when we have an opportunity and come out of this COVID situation. But as far as my background goes, just going back to the beginning, I'm from Northeast Ohio. Grew up raising Arabian show horses on a farm. The farm really proved, I think, very influential in my life, in that I really started to work with machines and complicated machines like hay balers, and I think it really had a profound influence on me becoming an engineer. But anyway, after high school, went to school until they ran out of degrees. Eventually got a PhD from Princeton University, specializing in plasma physics, and I was really interested in doing things that would allow humanity to really extend its reach into the universe. So I was working on advanced space propulsion systems that could take us beyond Earth orbit, but take us to other planets and ultimately beyond. After school, I worked for 10 years as a government civil servant, 5 with the Air Force and 5 with NASA, applying this training that I had acquired at Princeton that allowed me to do some really cool in-space applications with the Air Force. One thing I worked on was really interesting. We were doing experiments where while the experiments were running, we were consuming more power than the entire Earth was consuming electrically, which can create some very interesting physical phenomena. Then at NASA, I worked on human spaceflight vehicles and technologies that would allow us to get to Mars in, on the order of 20 some days, not months and months and months like is currently envisioned with more conventional technology. In 2005, I had fatefully met Elon Musk, and I ended up on a jungle island out in the South Pacific and was there for the first launch of the first Falcon 1, the first SpaceX rocket. And what I learned there really is that although I was interested in advanced technology, that technology was really not going to ever fly unless we figured out how to get to space economically and on a regular schedule. I believed in what Elon was saying, that sort of entrepreneurs and a bunch of smart rocket scientists could get together and we could figure out how to do it on our own and not rely on big governments, big aerospace companies. So I joined on to the SpaceX team. I was one of the first 100 employees there, and worked there through about 2011 and really got to see this dream actually become reality and see SpaceX become the flag bearer of what we call new space. I left SpaceX because I really thought it needed to be more about a movement, not about one company. So I thought I'd go out and I'd help the next company become the next SpaceX. So I worked as a senior engineer at Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin, and then I worked as the vice president of propulsion for Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic. And having been at those companies, I was unfortunately convinced that neither one of them was going to become the next SpaceX, and kind of reached that point in my life where I'd run out of billionaires and I'd run out of degrees. So I just decided I had to go out and try to create that next SpaceX on my own. And so that's the genesis of Firefly, and that's how I ended up here in Texas. And just to be clear, we're not trying to copy SpaceX or trying to do exactly what they're doing.
Right.
We're just trying to create a company that has the same sort of success, the same sort of impact that SpaceX has had, and been at it here for several years here in the Austin area. And I think we'll talk more about that as we go along, but look forward to to the questions that you have, Jay, and any other questions that folks have online tonight.
Great. Well, thank you for that background, Tom. I'm going to ask you a few questions about the space industry first, then we'll dive into Firefly more specifically, and then bring it back out to talk about space in the future. So obviously, space is on everybody's mind right now. We're seeing billionaires go into space and seeing lots of launches make the news. Why is space booming these last few years? I mean, in a way, it's because of people like you saying we believe this needs to happen. But what are the technological and business and social and any other factors that have caused it to really boom in the last few years?
Yeah, this is America, so it's all about money. And if there's one thing you take away from our conversation tonight is that you need to understand that space is not just about man on the moon. It's not just about exploration. It's really, space can really be thought of as the next frontier of the information revolution. What we're doing in space is very much tied to the advancement of the internet. It's tied to the voracious and insatiable appetite of the entire world for data. So space provides us with a new degree of freedom or a new way to distribute data around the Earth more uniformly and more holistically than we've ever been able to do before. And it also allows us to acquire new types of data that otherwise you couldn't acquire from the ground. For example, Earth images and things that are used in our Google Maps. So yeah, I think the big change is that space is really becoming very much tied in what's going on with the information revolution. And it's no surprise that if you look at the people that have really spearheaded the effort, they made it. They started their careers in establishing the sort of the .com revolution about 2 decades ago.
So you mentioned a couple of industry sectors there as driving this, and that was Earth observing systems and sort of global communication systems. Are there any other sort of subsectors within that are really great business opportunities right now, or are the rest of the business opportunities a bit further downstream when we have cheaper craft can go to the moon and asteroids and so on? Is it mostly about Earth observing and Earth communications now?
Yeah, it's definitely mostly about Earth observing and Earth communications. I should mention that the military is also sort of very much reconfiguring itself for 21st century adversaries. In the past, they used to put up giant monolithic, billion-dollar assets for monitoring things from space. But our adversaries have gotten smart enough that they could jeopardize those single assets. So the military is completely reconfiguring their presence in space, which calls for a much more disaggregated platform where you have tens or hundreds of thousands of satellites doing the job of what had been done in the past by one or just a few assets. So that's a big change. Exploration, I don't want to downplay it. It certainly still provides a lot of sort of seed impetus for technology development. And, certainly at Firefly, it's a big part of what we're doing right now. If you look at the revenue that we're generating with Firefly, a big part of it now are the lunar contracts that we're winning with NASA. That continues to be an important part, but certainly the private sector applications are dominating, and they are what will ultimately create multi-trillion-dollar business opportunities in the next couple decades.
So I think you kind of hit on it there, but I want to drill down a little bit. There's private sector opportunities driven by innovation, competition, money, as you said. There's exploration remains important. Where's the interplay between private sector and NASA and European Space Agency and others? How is private sector bolstering or working with the exploration missions and the governmental missions? Yeah,
and we live in such an exciting time now because it's really the first time where we don't have to rely on the government to do everything in space. And that's not to disparage what the government could do, we live in an era now where the government can do what it's best at, and the commercial sector can do what it's best at. So as far as the sort of the general division, I think the government will continue to have more flexibility to really advance state-of-the-art technology and invest our tax resources in creating fundamental new capability, which will allow us to, reach for that dream of extending humanity's reach deeper into the solar system. Whereas the commercial sector can do what it does best, things like establishing economies of scale and mass production to dramatically lower the costs and reduce the barriers of entry to space. So I think nothing about space is mundane, but if I had to just kind of broadly describe it, I'd say that the more mundane and repetitive missions will be left to the private sector, and the more ambitious and really expensive missions will be left to the government.
That's an interesting distinction, but I have one follow-up question to that. In some of those cases, will the government still use private sector rockets to support in some way their more exploration-oriented missions?
Yeah, the government should buy conventional technology, and however it manifests itself in very large rockets or other systems. Where the government should and will spend its money is the technology that's riding on those rockets. So, for example, the government will begin, I believe, deploying nuclear power in space and nuclear rockets in space that have never been done before. And that's really probably not something you want the private sector doing. It's something that is, handled by the Department of Energy and NASA. So the conventional rockets will take this technology to space, but then the astronauts will be sitting on a nuclear rocket that was, designed and built for and by NASA to go to Mars, for example.
Great. So you've mentioned some of the names. In fact, you've worked at some of the names, but who are some of the big and mid-sized players in the space industry now? I mean, everybody's heard of SpaceX, and probably everybody in Austin has heard of everything Elon's done because he's got offices here for everything. But you mentioned, of course, Blue Origin. You mentioned Branson's outfit, but who are the big players and who are the next group of players in this space industry?
Honestly, it's all about SpaceX. The old companies are hanging on for dear life as Elon increasingly eats into their market share. The new companies like Firefly are trying to become the next SpaceX. They're really just operating at a whole different level than everyone else, frankly.
Do you think there's room for other ones to, if not catch up and be number one, grab a side? Is the field big enough, or will it be big enough to support 3, 5, 10 players?
Yeah, look, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm not an Elon fanboy trying to catch up with Elon. I'm working on things that when we show up in the future, we will be better than than SpaceX, in my view, and the approach we're taking. So that's personally my philosophy is, we don't want to copy or try to sort of asymptotically catch up to anyone. We are working on things that are fundamentally different, and I think fundamentally better, so that 5-10 years down the road, we will have created another company that's on par or exceeds what SpaceX is doing. So then if you look around, I think you have a whole swarm of companies that are, just trying to reproduce what SpaceX has done. They have a smaller rocket, they're going to build a bigger rocket, then they're going to build a bigger one, and go down that road. Space is a big place. There's a ton of business. There's a huge amount of money going into it. I mean, if you just look at the gaudy figures of these startup space companies and the kind of money they're raising compared to normal startup companies, it's clear that there's a lot of resources going into it, and the people that are putting those resources into it are smart people and everybody sees a lot of business. So, I can't completely tell the future, but from everything I can see, it's going to be a huge amount of opportunity for multiple companies for sure.
Well, Tom, let's talk a little bit about Firefly in that space. I mean, you've mentioned some brand ambitions and goals that you've set. You've certainly got great experience working for some of the companies that we've all heard about, but where does Firefly fit precisely into the commercial space? What is your area of expertise? Where are you targeting your efforts to try to be unique or better?
So most companies that are starting up now, at least in space transportation, are rocket companies. Firefly is not a rocket company. We are trying to build ourselves to be an end-to-end space transportation company. So we not only get you off the surface of the Earth, but we provide mobility once you're in space, and then we provide systems to allow you to land on other planetary bodies. So, we're an end space transportation company. Another thing that's different about us, and another unique opportunity that I see, is that we would like to become sort of the OEM component supplier for this industry. It's kind of crazy that every time one of these companies starts, you have to go out and invent this, very difficult technology. So we would like to provide a resource for this industry that's similar to the auto industry, where you can buy Bosch brakes or other components and build cars from them. So that's going to be another unique thing that we're going to try to build up.
Tom, what exactly inspired you to create this? I mean, you talked about your history, but I don't think I quite got the inspiration. Was there a moment? Was there did it start as a kid? Did it start in college? What inspired you to take this path?
Oh, now we're going to go to a philosophical conversation.
Sure.
No, I do think it's my calling. Honestly, that would be first and fundamental. I feel it in my bones. I'm passionate about it, and it's just part of me. But going back to what I said when I got started at SpaceX, I was trying to develop technologies that would profoundly change how humanity could move around in space. And I realized that my inventions were never going to leave the laboratory until we licked the problem of getting to space and made it more economical and made it more accessible. And so I drank the Elon Kool-Aid that it could be done in a fundamentally different way. And I had the benefit of being part of making that happen. And coming out of that, it's just like you can't get enough after that. It's like, let's go. And so I've been on riding this new space wave for about the past 15 years. And that's what still motivates me today, is this reproducing and growing what we started at SpaceX.
Tom, I love that answer. And I interview a lot of people, but I can hear the passion in your voice, even as you're trying to speak in a measured and logical flow. I can feel you almost reining it in. So I believe you when you say it's your calling. I got to ask you a different question. We're the Austin Forum on Technology and Society. Since the pandemic, we have embraced going national and global. And so Austin is more of a brand, but not a scope anymore. We really aspire over the next year and a half to reach more people around the country and around the world. That said, there are some special things about Austin, Texas. But until there really wasn't much of there were definitely people at UT doing work. There were some other companies doing things, but I think you really got us on the map in space. What made you pick Austin to base Firefly?
Yeah, anything I do, I always try to lean back and thoughtfully consider options. What would be the best way to do this, and that often that means not just copying what other people have done in the past. You're not going to fundamentally change things or transform things if you just copy what other people are doing, right? So the predictable thing would have been to just stay in Southern California, like many of the aerospace companies. But I'd had the benefit of, one of my jobs was I was the first director of SpaceX's McGregor, Texas test facility. So I'd gotten a taste of what it was like to do business in Texas. And, I definitely fell in love with the regulatory environment, the economic climate in Texas, the really down to earth, get stuff done, people that were in Texas. But as part of all the jobs I've had in all the different places I've hired people, really, probably one of the biggest things that drew me to Texas and one of the biggest considerations in setting up a company was spouses. It's pretty easy to get people interested in doing this stuff. It's very cool stuff, but often in rockets and space, it's taking place in really inhospitable locations, like Van Horn, Texas, for example. It's really hard. It's really yeah. If you go to your spouse and say, "Hey, honey, I'm gonna, go do this amazing thing with so and so," and he or she's like, "Oh, where is it?" And you're like, "Oh, it's Mojave Desert." And you're like, "Oh, okay, well, write me letters, honey." But so when I came to Austin, one of the big considerations is I wanted to create a company in an environment where the spouse and the families would have amazing opportunities to do really cool things and rewarding things outside of the context of the company or the employee. And Austin's just unique in that way that there's just such a diverse culture and diverse types of opportunities for families to flourish here, while the engineer or the technician is doing their work here at Firefly. So that's a big thing.
Tom, I love that answer. I didn't expect that. I thought it was going to be either there is a great tech community here and we have a lot of innovation to do, so we want to partner with all of that. Or I thought you were going to say it'd be a great place for my employees to live. So I love that you thought about the spouses and you wanted
somebody you've heard, happy wife, happy life. If that's the fundamental criteria, then
so
is she going to be happy?
So we talked a little bit about why you came here. Tell us a little bit about your first mission, Alpha One.
Yeah, so we've been developing our first launch vehicle, Alpha, that can put about 1,000 kilograms into low Earth orbit. It's been a long, challenging journey, but tomorrow at Vandenberg Air Force Base, Alpha rolls out onto the launch pad, which just building the launch facility was incredibly challenging as well. And we expect on August 18th to do a hold down test with the rocket, let it run for 15 seconds and check all the systems out. And then we have a launch slot September 2nd to actually conduct the first orbital flight attempt.
That'd be great. I want to make sure that we get the URL for the feed from that from you too after this event so that we can share it with our mailing list, which is well over 1,000 people. We want to make sure that they're all able to tune in and then further share it with their friends and networks as well. So that's September 2nd?
Yeah, September 2nd. And we've hired a professional outfit to cast this. One thing about Firefly, we're very transparent. So this is a test flight of a rocket. At SpaceX, we crashed 3 of them before we got it right. So it'll be an interesting show one way or another. And we're very transparent. And so hopefully we'll be able to stream all that live for better or worse.
Well, we look forward to seeing that. I want to take a pause here and remind all of our watchers that we gave instructions at the beginning of the event, but there is an Austin Forum Slack workspace. And in that Austin Forum Slack workspace, which you can join by going to the website, austinforum.org, if you join that Slack workspace and add the channel space-questions, you can submit questions there that Heather is going to review and ask some of those, and actually have you ask some of those towards the end of the event. So we encourage you to use chat to talk to each other, to add to the content, et cetera. But for questions to be considered for the end, please put those in the Slack workspace to make it a little bit easier for Heather. And with that, I'm going to get back to some more of the questions that Tom and I had prepared. So Tom, tell us a little bit about the scale of the company now and, people, funding, et cetera, and what your growth trajectory is.
Yeah, our trajectory is straight up. We have about 400 employees now, primarily located here in Cedar Park, Texas. Just ballpark, resources required to do this. Our seed round was $200 million, which again, having spent some time down at the Capital Factory and such, talking to other folks starting their, companies, a couple $100 million for a seed round is pretty unprecedented. It just kind of shows you the scale of and the financial challenge of this business. As far as our growth goes, I think over the next couple of years, we'll probably be up over 1,000 people. We're growing all around the country, more launch sites. We intend to expand overseas as well. We have multiple parts of our product line that I alluded to at the beginning of the conversation. In 2 years, we will land on the moon, which is going to be another big, key moment in the history of Firefly. And just to give you some more scale of numbers, our Firefly rocket sells for $15 million per vehicle. Each of the lunar missions pay about $100 to $150 million. So it shows you how the exploration part of what we do is still incredibly important to the business. And that's, again, something I learned at SpaceX. If we hadn't developed the Dragon capsule while we were developing the Falcon 9 launch vehicle, I'm not sure SpaceX would be the same company that it is today. And that's something I learned. And when I started Firefly, I tried to look for contemporary opportunities that were similar to what we did with the Dragon capsule and delivering payload to space station at SpaceX. And fortunately, there's this opportunity called commercial lunar payload services. So kind of against better judgment, while developing a rocket, we decided to try to throw our hat in the ring to develop a lunar lander system. And that effort fortunately paid off. In January, we defeated a dozen other teams that have been doing this for a long time and won a $100 million lunar contract. So that's going to be a big part of our growth. And so in Cedar Park, we've sort of segregated the company into the launch vehicle part and spacecraft part. And we were just fortunate enough to buy a big facility here in Cedar Park that will be developing that lunar lander in and building clean rooms and all the type of test equipment that you have to build spacecraft. So launch vehicles and spacecraft galore, growing in the next couple of years, and then setting up that component business. We've actually had some of our competitors have come to us and recently bought rocket engines from us, which is a great start to that whole business line as well. So just tons going on. Often people ask me what keeps me up at night, and it's honestly, it's not worrying. It's more of just all the incredible opportunity that's out there, and just wanting to get up and go do it and do it fast and make sure we get there ahead of the competition.
Well, I love that enthusiasm and that optimism, and that's great. I'm sure that there have been some challenges and technical ones and business ones and whatnot along the way, even for a company like yours that's doing so well. What's the biggest technological challenge Firefly has had to overcome?
So Firefly is a vertically integrated company, which means we pretty much build everything ourselves. That allows us to control cost and schedule. We design, build, test.
I'm not hearing Tom right now.
Yeah, me either. One moment.
Tom, we may have had an issue there.
Yeah, I think I got muted.
Somehow you got muted. Sorry about that, Tom.
So where did I leave off?
Let's just start from the beginning. What is the biggest technological challenge you've had to overcome?
Yeah. So Firefly is a vertically integrated company. That means we develop our technology in-house that allows us to control cost and schedule. So we design, build, test our own rocket engines and other components of the vehicle. So ironically, our biggest technical challenge is those few components that we relied on other people to develop and deliver. Alpha should have launched earlier this year, but there was one key electronic component that we had outsourced from a company that we thought had the heritage to do this, but they just technologically were not able to get it done. And it's just been a very difficult slog waiting for them to figure it out. Fortunately, now we do have that component, but the rest of it, when we built the company so that we would be able to deal with the technical challenges. We have this 200-acre test site up in Briggs, so we can work 24/7 to solve our problems. And there always are technological problems, but when you can solve them yourself versus being beholden to someone else's schedule or their passion, which may not be very big compared to yours, that's the tough technological challenge. And so that's the kind of one of the lessons learned from the experience of the last few years is probably even do more ourselves.
Thank you for sharing that. I read the Ashley Vance book on Elon Musk, and the SpaceX portion of that book talked a lot about that also, inventing things yourself, having some control over it. I mean, we live in a world of global supply chains and cost efficiencies of moving parts around and whatnot. And that has many advantages, but it also has some disadvantages that maybe we had overlooked up until the pandemic. And that, of course, impacted some supply chains. But as you've pointed out, when you're on the cutting edge, it might impact some quality and meeting requirements kinds of problems as well. So when you're at the cutting edge and everything depends on everything going just right, you might have to do it yourself, especially at the dollar scale and value scale of what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's all right. So tell me about one more thing about your Firefly. What's the most rewarding thing about your work each day? I mean, you clearly have a lot of fire in your belly. You have an entrepreneur's mindset. You're fascinated by space, but what is the most rewarding thing sort of day in and day out? Because obviously launches take a long time to get to. So there's got to be something that's keeping you full, keeping your heart full day to day. What is that?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to the beginning, I've never really had a passion I've heard a lot of folks that were, trying to become astronauts and such, and that's great. I've never really had a passion for going out into space. My passion is to build the machines that allow us to do that. And that's my art. The art of engineering is designing, building these machines. And then, so the greatest pleasure is when one of these machines fires up. Going back to the horse farm, I worked with these incredibly powerful and beautiful 1 horsepower animals. When I go out to our test site and we fire up the things we've done, Alpha produces 1,000,000 horsepower, okay? And there's just something just outside of your normal experience when you're around that kind of power, and to know that you've engineered things that are able to constrain that and hold it together, it's just super inspiring. And then just to see the kind of raw emotion and satisfaction that gives all the young people that have come here and this is their first job working on something like that, and they've had their hand in it. It's just super gratifying.
Well, let's flip back for a bit to the space industry as a whole, and I want to talk about the technical and other challenges for it going forward and what's coming next. So let's go with the optimism part. What do you see on the horizon for the future of space innovation? I mean, I know that we have many companies building rockets, and in some ways, rockets are built not all that fundamentally dissimilar to quite some time ago. You mentioned nuclear power a little while ago. Is that one of the big innovations you see becoming a regular part of space industry? Are there other innovations you see on the near-term horizon?
Yeah, as much as I love the machines, I know, probably 9 out of 10 people just get very excited about the mission. So I think NASA's renewed drive to establish permanent presence on the moon is going to create all kinds of incredible innovations. It's not just touchdown and come back. It's going to be building habitats and like a recurring presence, on another planetary body. I think that's going to be really inspiring and create a lot of innovations. I think, we're confronted with things like climate change, and I think we're going to increasingly see what we're doing in space is giving us better insight as to what's going on. in our own planet. We're fortunate that even though we haven't flown yet, NASA has hired us to do some missions with satellites that will reveal things about pollution on the Earth and what's going on with the climate of the Earth. So I think that's another innovation that's going to touch people's lives, day to day. But ultimately, the proliferation of internet coverage around the world is going to be incredibly impactful in the democratization of information. I think it's something like 60% of the world doesn't have access to the internet now. And when Elon gets done with his Starlink constellation, you're going to have 100% coverage on the Earth, and now you're going to have people exchanging ideas all around the world. You're going to have commerce to touching everyone in the world, and there's from the Firefly movie series, there's an expression like you can't stop the signal from the sky. So when I say democratization, I think space has the potential to really remove a lot of the barriers to communication, and how the kind of profound impacts that have, I think, is also going to be inspiring and innovative.
Thanks for the reference to the Firefly series. I didn't type it in the chat at the opening question. I saw lots of great things in there. I don't know if anyone else typed that in, but that was certainly one of my favorites. So what do you think are the biggest challenges for your whole sector, not just for Firefly, but for your whole sector? And they don't have to be just technological, but what are the biggest challenges for the decade ahead?
I think the biggest challenge is for all these companies, including Firefly, that have taken in a lot of other people's money and proving they can do what they said they were going to do. So that's going to be the really interesting thing in the next 5 years. You have hundreds and hundreds of millions and billions of dollars going into these new companies and these investors expecting some technical results and expecting some financial results. So I think, and that's a challenge. People put out a lot of business models. People put out a lot of projections on the type of technology they can develop. So it's going to be very interesting to see which companies actually live up to all the promises. And again, I include Firefly in that pool of companies that have a lot of companies talking about the amazing things they're going to do. It's going to be very interesting to see who actually crosses into that elite and small crowd of companies that have actually done it.
Well, so that's really no different than other areas in which there's lots of startups. Some of them will maybe not succeed in the technology they need to be competitive, and others just may not succeed for business reasons, right? Maybe they don't develop the right contracts. Maybe
I mean, we kind of surf on the waves of the markets. The markets are open now. The markets, SPACs and these things. There's a lot of resources available. In some ways, I think the pandemic has hindered our abilities in some ways. Like we're dealing with chip shortages and stuff too. But in another way, I think it's really energized what we're doing, because there's just something in people now that is very hopeful and looking to the future. People don't want to think about mundane things anyway. They want to latch on to the future and things that will have transformative influences, and space has always been that way. So it's pretty clear to me, just right in the midst of this pandemic, there's been kind of a shift from like, oh, that's risky stuff, to this is the future. Let's put resources behind it and get on board with that. I think I forgot your question, but hopefully that answered.
You did answer it, and it leads into the next one, which is the Austin Forum community is much like the community that might watch a TEDx talk or attend sessions at South by Southwest Interactive. They may not all be experts in the topic of the evening, but they're all experts in something, in AI, in drones, in IoT, in clean energy, you name it. So we have a very diverse audience that comes to these events, and they often come not just to learn in the usual PBS special kind of way, but sometimes to see how could they get involved? How could they partner or collaborate, or maybe they're even looking to change career direction. So do you have any guidance for the kind of technology expertise that is needed to continue evolving the space industry? Not building rockets, but any of the other kinds of technology that maybe people in our audience might have some expertise in.
I mean, these things are ultimately, what we're doing is ultimately being funded by the end users of the technology that we're deploying. So I mentioned data at the beginning, and this is all about data. And there are a myriad of things you can do with data. So I think data analytics in general and conceiving of how you can use that data would be like a way to get involved that is not a direct way. You know, for example, if you have all these Earth images that are available, if you can take those, apply genetic algorithms, artificial intelligence to go in and glean information from those images, there are all kinds of use cases for that. They could be on your phone. You could have an app that's like, how many cars are at the mall, you know, and you just tell it the mall, and these supercomputers like process instantly. You know, there is 75% of the parking lot is available, and there you can charge somebody a quarter for that information or something. So there are businesses like that, I think, that have a lot of potential for people to get involved in. Yeah, so the data analytics side, really, I'm sorry, that's just kind of the one that's really comes first to mind, because it's just so broad. You know, what you could do with the data, I think is a big opportunity. Got it.
I'm going to ask you a couple of final questions that leverage your entrepreneurial spirit and your passion. What inspires you, and what are you most excited about next? Obviously, the successful launch on September 2nd is obvious, but what are you most excited about next in your company? You mentioned launch vehicles and spacecraft. You mentioned, you know, NASA's sustained habitat on the moon. What are you personally most excited about next in the field?
So my philosophy on entrepreneurship and building businesses, you know, I focus on four things. I call them the 4 8s: anticipate, innovate, create, and dominate. So I think a really key thing is to anticipate the future, to anticipate what people are going to need. And then the second part is innovating, designing, you know, machines and or products that uniquely satisfy that perceived need in the future. And then creating is building it, turning it into reality. And then the part of dominating is being first to market and consolidating other businesses that are coming along the lines. But so the thing that excites me is that I really do believe that I can see what the future is going to need. And I really do believe that the approach that we're taking is very unique and novel, and that to a large extent, the rest of the world is just chasing Elon and trying to be like Elon. So I think we have a very unique vision of how to fundamentally transform how we move around in space, how we get to space, how we move around in space. So I'm just most excited about bringing that vision to life over the next few years.
Awesome. Well, you have answered all of my questions, Tom, and I really appreciate the insights and perspective you gave. We have a lot of questions in the Space Questions channel, and now we want to make sure, since we couldn't network in person, we wanted to do this experiment by doing this as a meeting instead of a webinar, so that people could ask their questions, but we're going to do it with a sense of professionalism and order. So Heather is going to pick questions from that channel and invite that person to ask their question live. And Heather is going to save her last question for about 7:35 p.m. And that last question will be the one that wins the South by badge if they are still here. So we encourage you to stay through to the end if you want to win the South by badge. So Heather, you want to take it away and start calling on people to ask questions that have been submitted?
Yeah, and if I may say so, Heather, please put some pointy questions in there too. It's all right.
All right.
I have to pitch to investors all the time, so believe me, I'm ready to take it.
Duly noted. Good to know. Okay, so first, is Emma Tucker here with us at this time? Emma Tucker?
Emma?
Yeah.
All right. So
yeah,
Emma,
I'm here.
all right, great. Emma, you actually asked several questions, and I liked all of your questions. I thought all of your questions were quite thoughtful. In the interest of fairness, could you select one of your questions to ask? Because I thought all of your questions were excellent. If you could just select one of them.
Oh, goodness. Let me see.
Emma, how many questions did you submit?
There were several, but they were all quite good.
Like 6.
Yeah.
I'm inquisitive. Okay.
Well, we might come back
All right.
later
What
to-
regulations do you see popping up in this space that will help ensure safety for everyone?
Did you, I'm sorry, you said what innovations are going to assure safety for everyone?
regulations.
What regulations
Oh,
do you
Regulations.
anticipate?
and are you asking in particular about human spaceflight or protecting people on the ground, or?
Human spaceflight. That's what I was imagining. Yeah. I mean, maybe there's more to it that I just don't know. And there's regulations in the other space too.
Yeah, so the governing authority over everything we do is the FAA. And so, as you know, the FAA is, regulates aircraft. And so you'll just see the FAA will continue to regulate space and in a way that, and space flight in a way that's consistent with the principles they've used in commercial aircraft operation. I think one interesting area is the space tourism, because that's going to involve a lot of people, flying to space. So, and I'm not an expert in this area, so I don't want to act like I am, but those businesses have certain exemptions now that protect them, for example, for litigation associated with an accident during a space tourism event. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see if over time, if that posture doesn't change, because what they're trying to do now is they're trying to encourage the industry, and by kind of taking that threat of litigation away, it makes it more economically viable to do it. So I think as the industry matures, one of the regulatory things you'll see to perhaps make people safer is the removal of this sort of exemption from culpability if there are accidents. That's one thing that comes to mind. I think here's the other big thing. When you do things a lot of times, it just gets safer and safer. You get more experience, and as you become more experienced, things just fundamentally become safer. I'm an older guy. I can remember in the 80s when it seemed like there was a 737 running into something like, every other week, or maybe that's exaggerated, every other month. Now, in the last decade, it's just, it's almost unheard of for there to be an airline accident. And, that just has to do with, I think, the decades and decades of experience we've had doing it. So outside of regulation, I just think there'll just be a lot of learning that will continually evolve these machines to be safer and safer as we go along. But, having said that, if you listen to Elon, and he talks about, going to Mars, he's very unequivocal that, people are going to die on this campaign to go to Mars. And it's just, it's just part of the cost of extending this reach deeper into the universe, as I said earlier. And it's just something as a society and culture will have to come to terms with of how much risk we're willing to take.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Sandy Barker had a question that several people asked a variation on this question. Sandy, are you here? And if so, can you ask your question?
I am. Oh, shoot, and I think I'm.
Sandy, I thought you would have asked me everything you could possibly ask by now. We worked together for years.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great to see you. I'm getting an echo for some crazy reason. 1 second.
No,
I can-
your audio went off there, Sandy. Your audio before was okay. It didn't sound like it was coming through your headset actually, but it was okay.
I can ask her question if she'd like.
Okay, I've got it. Can you
All
hear me
right.
now?
Yes.
we can.
Yes.
Okay, my question is, and I think I've heard you say things about this before, so I know you have an answer or I wouldn't ask it. How big a concern is space debris for Firefly as more and more small to microsats are launched to low Earth orbit? And does Firefly plan to play a part in space debris mitigation?
Yeah, it's incredible the expanse of space that's up there. And even though we're talking about thousands of satellites, they will still maintain reasonable separation even with that many satellites up there. Having said that, it only takes one accident to create a lot of debris. We've all seen the movie Gravity, where there's a collision and now it's just this giant swarm of debris. So it is a serious problem. But as a businessman, when I hear the term serious problem, I think serious business opportunity. So we are definitely part of this architecture I'm very excited about, will allow us to play a major role in the space debris mitigation problem. For example, and Emma asked about regulation. I think one of the regulations that's coming down the roads is if you put something into space, you are responsible for making sure it gets out of space after it reaches the end of its useful lifetime. Now, the problem with getting something out of space that's been up there for 10 or 15 years is not a simple problem. It involves propulsion systems and guidance and navigation systems and all kinds of things. And so for Firefly, where we see the opportunity is when these regulations do come down the road, or even before then, just for people being, responsible space stewards, instead of putting that technology on their vehicle, they'll simply be able to sign a contract with Firefly, and we will use the things that we're developing to actually remove spent assets from space at the end of their useful life.
All right. Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
Now this sort of dovetails in some way to Bill Kleinbecker, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, had some questions about 5G communications, and I think well, actually, I'll let you kind of get at that, Mr. Kleinbecker, if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question there. Kind of, if you could consolidate, if you would.
Okay, Mr. is my father. It seems to me one of the more immediate things coming down the pike is going to be 5G communications. And it's going to enable things like esports and highly participative multimedia, if you can handle the jitter that happens with today's communications. Well, with a single satellite, you can handle that kind of need for all of us. So one of my questions is do you think that's viable? Do you see that as a strong market?
5G from space?
Well, actually, low Earth orbit.
Yeah.
You'll get to the 1/10 of a millisecond response with that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm not a telecommunications expert, but my understanding is that 5G technology is very short ranged.
Right. Yeah.
So it's actually, I think 5G could be very powerful in urban environments where you have a very dense population. But this the space applications, I think, will not be competitive in those types of environments, but actually will be more competitive in the areas where you won't have 5G, because it's just, you'd have to have
Bingo. That's
too
my
many
other
5G cars.
question.
Yeah.
Is we got this $1 trillion infrastructure bill, and it's not only bridges and roads, it's also rural.
Yes.
So the money's almost sitting there.
Yeah, and I think Elon always benefits from what's going on. I don't know how, but if you look at Starlink, the constellation he's putting up now, last I checked, he was getting hundreds of millions, or maybe approaching $1 billion of this economic development and providing internet to rural areas through the Starlink satellites. So it just landed right in his lap. Just like the reimbursements and incentives for building electric cars. It's just, he always seems to be at the right place at the right time.
Can you do it more cheaply?
Can I? No, we can't. Fireflies, we're all about space transportation, and we're not gonna. Yeah, right now we're not envisioning trying to compete with Elon on transferring data.
All right, let me go ahead and have another question here. Zach Aubert. Zach, are you here?
Yep, yes I am.
All right, if you'd like to ask your question, sir.
Yeah, I was wondering, you mentioned how SpaceX has had many tries to get off the pad and be successful. How has Firefly structured itself with its the company structure, but also its funding and investments, that should failures occur, which ultimately we hope they don't, but they may, that it's not going to lead to a multi-year delay or end up in bankruptcy?
Yeah. So first of all, I would call Firefly a second generation new space company. So first generation new space companies would be SpaceX and Blue Origin, perhaps Virgin Galactic. So in a second generation company, these are people that helped build the first generation company. So this ain't our first rodeo. So a lot of the mistakes we made back then, we won't make again. And this is not to say we're, doing anything that's utilizing proprietary technology or whatever. It's just some basic fundamental things we learned that we've applied in our vehicles and our operations that give us a higher likelihood of success from the outset, not because we're smarter, but just not that we're smarter than those companies. It's just that we have the benefit of experience behind us. So that's one thing. But as far as the financial aspects, you certainly want to make sure you have enough money in the bank, enough runway, as they call it, to be able to move through multiple launch failures. And you just, again, you have to be very open with your investors and what expectations are. And you can't overpromise. And certainly the first flights are test flights, and everybody's on the same page, and they understand that as long, the goal is to, if there is a failure, it's to find something that you couldn't have found in ground testing. And there'll be a small subset of things of that nature. And if you do discover them in flight, then you can work around them for the next flight and ultimately be successful.
Thank you so much, Tom. Is Jody Slagle with us here? Jody, are you still here?
I do see a Jody.
Yes.
Jody,
Yes.
if you could ask your question, please, Jody.
Oh yeah, I had several. I guess I'll just pick one.
All right.
I was wondering what you see for the future of space exploration, maybe even colonization and other activities, say 10 years, 25 years, maybe 50 years out from now.
Yeah. So having worked for Elon, I can tell you what the man sets out to do. I have complete confidence that he'll achieve what he set out to do. And SpaceX was built with the exclusive purpose of ultimately doing missions to Mars. So that's going to happen. And it's going to happen in his lifetime. He's around 50 years old. So just calibrate your exploration expectations on Elon's life expectancy. So I'm thinking in the next 20 years, you will see humans with SpaceX outfits landing on Mars. Now, the planets don't just align to the will of Elon. There are certain synodic periods for the planetary alignments. And I think around 2033 and 2039 are kind of your prime opportunities for when the alignments are in the best shape. So I'd set your clocks to 2033, and 2039 is one of the more likely landing events. Now, NASA, I think, is really going to make a real push for the moon, and we're going to learn how to live in space on the moon, and that will be sort of a pathfinder for what we do on Mars. So I think we're going to get a lot of great experience and entertainment from what's going on the moon in the intervening years before Elon pushes to Mars.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gregory, I'm not sure how I can pronounce your last name. Is it Homatas? Are you here, Gregory? You had a good question.
Gregory's here.
Gregory, are you here? Let's see here.
Still connected to Zoom, but maybe he stepped away.
May have stepped away. All right.
No, I was muted.
Oh, okay. There we are.
Yeah,
Gregory?
I muted myself.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Right, you had a question about partners and partnerships
Yes,
in adventure?
if you're able to tell us, do you have international partners in this venture? If you're able to tell us, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit.
Yes, definitely. You know, our motto at Firefly is making space for everyone, and everyone is the entire humanity, the entire Earth. When at the end of the day, I think what we're doing, this whole new space movement, is bigger than one company. You know, this is about, again, extending the reach of humanity into space, all of humanity. So we're always very interested in international collaboration. There are a lot of smart people all around the world. At Firefly, at one point, I actually had 200 employees in Ukraine. So we were utilizing a lot of that Soviet heritage expertise to help us.
Very bright.
Yeah, very bright, hardworking people. Like I'm from Ohio, as I said, and I was amazed. Ukraine is. It reminds me completely of Ohio, like Ohio. The flora, the fauna, a little bit of the industrial burnout, lots of people smoking. Very Ohio-like Ukraine is. So that's one thing. The other thing that we're really working on now is international launch sites. So we're trying to build a very modular system that can be deployed anywhere in the world, and build copies of it right here in Central Texas, and then deploy them to various areas. Right now, we're looking at several European sites. So that'll probably be one of our next big international collaborations.
Great, best of luck. Where will your September second launch be publicized, if you could tell us, or how, what platform?
The second launch, when will it happen? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, the September 2nd one, yeah. Where can we see it in terms of the web or whatever?
We'll make sure we get the word out.
We'll share it.
Yeah, we'll be sure and share it.
We'll get it from Tom, and we'll share it with our community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll make sure we help you get that out.
Great, thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Now, I feel like you've touched on this a little bit, but we did have another question on this. Duncan Glass. Duncan, you had a question about someone who's just starting.
Yes, I did.
All right, Duncan, if you can go ahead and ask your question.
All right. So I was wondering what your advice is for someone who is looking into starting a business around the space and aerospace industry, or somebody who wants to become a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. You know, this is the first business I ever started, and it's been pretty brutal. I mean, building a business is really, really hard. So I always, you know, tell people it's a very personal thing. And before you get into it, you know, take a look at your life and the implications it could have on your life, because you're going to have to put, you know, your heart and soul and blood and sweat into it. So first of all, make sure you're calibrated for a really difficult, a very difficult slog. I mean, you don't really get it until you actually do it. People can talk to you about it, and you can hear stories, and it all sounds very romantic. It was a great expression. Again, I keep hating to bring up Elon, but I very distinctly remember him saying, you know, when you start a company, it's so exciting. The first year is just really exciting. And then about somewhere in the second year, it's akin to standing on the edge of the abyss chewing glass, which you do have to kind of go through the fire to build a successful company. So I'd say first step is to get your mind calibrated. Second step is to reflect on what I said about those 4 8s. You know, do you really think you're anticipating the future? Do you really think you have an innovative solution to the future? Are you willing to work as hard as you need to? Are you able to get the resources you need to actually create this vision that you have? And are you willing to work hard enough and fast enough to make sure you show up first to market? So those are some of the first things you need to think of. You know, having passion for something, I believe, is certainly a necessary condition for business success. But listen to me, it's not a sufficient condition. And I think people get trapped in this a lot, especially engineers like myself who are like, oh, I'm going to invent this cool technology and then I'm going to ram it down the throat of society and they're going to want it and they're going to like it. It's not the way it works. You really have to start with assuring yourself in your mind that the product that you're creating is going to be in demand, that there's a need for it, and that you're not starting a company just because you think it's cool or you like playing with certain technology. That's kind of a path to disappointment.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right. Let's see. We have time for one more.
Before the award winner?
One more before the award winner. One last. Okay, let's see here. So this is actually a question that I wanted to touch on. Emma Tucker did ask a question earlier, but I really thought this was a good question. Her question is, are investors knowledgeable in this space? How do you pitch to investors who might not know the technological advances of what Firefly does compared to SpaceX or other companies?
Yeah, one of the things that I've learned in the ups and downs of this company is your seed investors have to be people that are knowledgeable and passionate about space. You are not going to be able to start a company like this with people that are just financial investors that are interested in the financial outcome. Now, when you transition from that seed round into like Series A and Series B, you'll start pulling in more and more investors who are more in it for the financial outcome. And those investors, they don't necessarily have a passion for space, and frankly, they see so many deals, they have sort of the attention span of a gnat. It's like they just want to hear a few key things, and probably 9 out of 10 of those investors are followers. So they're just looking for that, lead investor that they're just going to follow and will assume that has validated what you're doing. So initially, very important to find the people with the passion to fund the seed round to get you to that first viable product. And then beyond that, you really need someone to come on board that is highly respected from just a purely financial investor perspective, which will then open the door for a lot of investors who are just followers, but nonetheless can write very big checks.
All right. Thank you very much. And then at this time, is Chip Norcross with us still? Chip, are you with us?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, he had some help with his question, and I have to say that I'm very impressed with this question. It comes from his assistant who is watching with him, and this is my favorite question of the night.
I'm good. Is it about quantum mechanics? Because I've been waiting for that question.
Well, I'm not sure how much his assistant is into quantum mechanics, but Chip, can you ask this question?
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather have my assistant do it. If that's
All right,
okay.
could your assistant please ask the question?
Sure. So in the rocket business, I've noticed that there's no real rocket that can fly like a plane.
Oh, man. Yes.
So you don't just have one ship that can land and take off on a singular pad and go to the moon and then land on that same pad.
Yeah.
But
Like an air.
like an airplane. So I actually took my inspiration from the Harrier jump jet that can take off vertically. And I don't really understand why we always use this one rocket that's really tall and really it just has a bunch of engines at the bottom and just flies up like that. And it's not something like a plane.
That's an amazing question. And it sounds like you're part of the next generation that's going to be able to go out and make that type of vision that you have a reality. I don't know if you can all see my screen. I tried to share my screen with you. Can any of you see that?
Yes.
But may I ask what the young person's name is?
Luke Norcross.
Okay. Hi, Luke. So what I've shown on my screen here is really what you're talking about, and your question really resonates with me because I completely agree with you. And I think the future of space flight is, and this also resonates with Emma's question, is we need to progress to more like aircraft-like operations where we have vehicles that roll down runways, go to space, and come back. When you think about it, how many airports are there in the world versus, Cape Canaveral launch sites? It's orders of magnitude more. So my dream is to build something like this vehicle that's shown here that we call a Gamma, and it would be able to do that. It would be able to take off from a runway going east, go to space, deploy a satellite, and 90 minutes later, it would come over the west horizon and land on that same runway, and you have gone all the way around the world, or even beyond once we get to space. So I really am encouraged by your question because it's my dream to, as well as yours, to see something like that happen. And I can tell you, I'm trying now to go out and get the resources to do something like that. It's a really, really ambitious project, and it will take some really great investors to come and get behind it. But if I could do that, that would be the magnum opus of my career. So hopefully I'll be able to.
And Tom, will you fly in that then?
At that point, yes, then I'll be probably old enough that nobody's depending on me. I won't have any kids in college or anything like that. So yes, I would definitely do it.
It's a very
Thank you, Luke,
pragmatic
for that
view.
great question. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.